The galaxy was dying. Every passing day brought more destruction, more suffering. The Zorath Collective, a cold and unyielding hive mind species, had swept through the outer rim like a wave of entropy. Entire civilizations were erased, not even a whisper of their existence remaining. The Zorath did not care for diplomacy, for negotiation, or even for life. They consumed, absorbed, and discarded. For months, the Galactic Council had stood paralyzed, their constituent species either too weak or too fearful to act. The Tarxans, with their enormous fleets and brutal tactics, had quickly retreated to their borders, unwilling to risk engaging the Zorath directly. The Kori, a race of hyper-intelligent beings, offered only cryptic advisories. The peaceful Valens, known for their technological mastery, had abandoned their stations, sealing off their systems to avoid the growing storm. And the human colonies, humans had been the last to be considered by the Council, a young race on the edge of galactic civilization. But their desperation had pushed them to do what no one else was willing to: ask for help. It came as a faint signal, weak, almost drowned out by the chaos of the universe, a distress call. At first, the Council assumed it was just another empty plea. They had seen hundreds of them by now, but this one was different. There was something in the tone, something unmistakably human, a plea not just for assistance, but for survival. "We need help," the transmission said, breaking through the noise. "We are humanity. We do not seek refuge. We seek to fight." At the heart of the Council chambers, tension crackled in the air. The representatives of the great galactic powers sat in a circle, their faces grim. Councillor Nura, the Kori diplomat, was the first to speak. "This is madness," she said. "They are unprepared. The Zorath will crush them within hours." "They're right," added the Tarxan representative, a large reptilian creature named Vrax. "We've all seen what the Zorath are capable of. Humanity's desperation won't change that." A murmur ran through the chamber, the other members nodding in agreement. It was, after all, a simple matter of numbers. The Zorath outclassed humanity in every conceivable way. Their psychic network could coordinate fleets with a single thought. They had no need for tactics. Every attack was a reflex, a preordained move in a galaxy-wide chess game. And humanity, with its unruly individuality, had no place in that game. But then, as if to throw all reason to the wind, the screen flickered. The face of Captain Jack Carter appeared on the central monitor. His dark hair was tousled, his face streaked with exhaustion, yet his eyes burned with a fierce, unyielding determination. "We're not asking for your pity," Carter's voice rang out through the chamber. "We're asking you to get out of our way." It was a simple statement, but it hit with the force of an explosion. The room fell silent. Carter's reputation had preceded him. He was a battle-hardened leader of humanity's last defense fleet, the Resolute. He had fought pirates, insurgents, and hostile factions across human space. But now, he was up against something far worse than anything he'd ever known. Yet there was no hesitation in his voice, no fear. "We're human," he continued, his words deliberate. "And if anyone's going to stop this nightmare, it's going to be us. You think you're the only ones who've lost everything. We've seen entire colonies erased from existence. We've seen our families torn apart. We've watched as every species that should have helped us turned their backs on our people. But here's the thing. You don't need us. We need you." There was a beat of silence before Carter's next words cut through the tension like a blade. "If you won't help us, fine. But you don't get to stand in our way." With that, he disconnected, leaving the Council in stunned silence. Outside the chamber, the human fleet was already assembling, ready to launch. It was their last chance, and Carter wasn't going to wait for permission. Back in the Council chambers, Councillor Nura turned to the others, her expression unreadable. "What do we do now?" she asked, though her tone was not one of doubt. "We wait," Vrax said grimly, "and pray they survive long enough to make us regret our inaction. And so, with one final desperate gambit, humanity had thrown down the gauntlet. The galaxy would never be the same. Captain Jack Carter stood at the helm of the Resolute, his gaze fixed on the star streaks outside the bridge windows. The hum of the engines reverberated through the ship's corridors, a constant reminder of the long journey ahead. They were deep in Zoreth-controlled space now, far from the safety of human colonies. The vast emptiness of the cosmos stretched out in front of them, and with it, the weight of the decision that had led them here, to defy the galaxy's greatest threat with nothing but their resolve and a few worn-out ships. "We've entered the Aileron system." Lieutenant Emily Ford's voice broke through the silence. Her fingers danced across the terminal console in front of her. Scans show no sign of enemy ships, but the outer planets have been glassed. Nothing left. Jack nodded, his jaw tightening. He had seen the reports from human outposts, entire worlds reduced to lifeless ords. The Zoreth didn't just kill, they annihilated, leaving no trace behind. But as grim as the data was, it wasn't enough to sway his purpose. Humanity had no choice but to fight or die trying. "Set a course for the Zoreth command station," he said, his voice steady. "We're going in hot. Full speed." Ford hesitated. "Captain, I know what you're thinking, but we can't keep throwing ourselves into the fire." "The odds are." "Don't talk to me about odds, Lieutenant," Jack interrupted, his tone sharp. "We don't have the luxury of waiting. We're not just here to survive. We're here to win. We make a stand now, or we're all wiped out." Ford didn't argue further. She knew that Jack Carter would never back down, not when the fate of his people was at stake. And there was something else, something in his eyes. It wasn't just stubbornness or pride. It was the kind of resolve you only saw in men and women who had nothing left to lose. As they approached the Zoreth command station, the Resolute slipped into the shadow of an asteroid belt. The plan was simple but deadly: infiltrate the station, disable its communications network, and send the Zoreth into chaos, even if only for a short time. They didn't have the firepower for a direct assault, so they would rely on stealth, quick thinking, and a heavy dose of luck. In the darkened war room of the Resolute, Dr. Olivia West, the ship's chief strategist, was laying out the final details of the operation. A former combat engineer turned tactical mastermind, West had been the one to push Carter into taking this risk. "We don't need to take the whole station," West said, tapping the holographic map that flickered above the table. "Just the core, the central communications array. If we can sever the Zoreth's psychic link to their fleet, even for a few hours, it'll give us the chance to strike." Carter studied the map, his brow furrowed. "What's the catch?" "The catch," West replied dryly, "is that once we're inside, we're in their territory. The station will be crawling with Zoreth warriors. We'll be outnumbered and outgunned, so we'll need to move fast and hit hard. No delays." "We can do it," said Sergeant Marcus Riley, the team's combat leader. He was a stocky man with a battle-hardened look about him. "I've led tougher raids than this. We've got the element of surprise. Let's use it." Carter's eyes met his, the weight of their shared responsibility clear. "We move in 10 minutes. Ford, prepare the shuttle. Riley, get the team ready. And West." "I'll be there," West interrupted. "This plan is my brainchild. I wouldn't miss it." As the crew mobilized, the tension on the bridge was palpable. Everyone knew the odds. They had no illusions about the difficulty of what lay ahead. The Zoreth were not just formidable foes. They were nearly unstoppable. And yet, Jack Carter was resolute in his conviction that humanity could find a way. The shuttle bay doors hissed open, and the team filed in, their faces a mix of grim determination and quiet fear. Jack's gaze swept over them one last time, feeling the weight of their sacrifice, of their willingness to fight for a future that seemed all but lost. "This is it," Carter said, his voice low but certain. "If we succeed, we buy time for everyone else. If we fail, we go down fighting. Either way, we're not going out quietly." The shuttle's engines roared to life, and the Resolute's airlock released them into the cold void of space. The team hurtled toward the Zorth command station, every heartbeat echoing in the silence of the universe. And with that, humanity's first strike against the Zorth began. The shuttle broke through the dense asteroid field with unnatural precision, its cloaking device keeping it hidden from the watchful eyes of the Zorth fleet. Inside, the team was silent, each person focused, their minds sharp and ready for the coming chaos. Captain Jack Carter sat at the front, his hand steady on the console, his gaze fixed on the dim, greenish glow of the Zorth command station ahead. He could feel the weight of the mission pressing down on him, but he refused to let fear or doubt creep into his thoughts. This was what they had trained for. This was their only shot. Dr. Olivia West, sitting across from him, was reviewing the mission parameters one last time. "The station's perimeter is heavily guarded," she said, her voice calm despite the gravity of their task. "If we can't disable their communications array within 10 minutes, we'll be swarmed. We need to be in and out." "Understood," Carter replied, eyes narrowing. "The element of surprise is our only advantage. We're not here to fight a battle. We're here to strike a blow and get the hell out before they regroup." The shuttle's engines hummed softly, carrying them closer to the station's core. The Zorth command station loomed ahead like a massive, jagged mountain in space, built from a material so dark it seemed to absorb the surrounding light. Its surface was covered with strange, organic growths, signs of the hive mind's influence, an eerie blend of biology and technology. 5 minutes to target, Lieutenant Emily Ford called from the cockpit. "Shields are up, and our cloaking field is holding. We should be able to dock undetected." "Good," Carter said, watching the station grow larger in the viewports. "Once we're aboard, we'll split into teams. Riley, you and your squad will take the central hub and secure the outer corridors. West and I will head to the communications array. Keep an eye out for any Zorth patrols. They'll be scattered but vicious when they catch on." Sergeant Marcus Riley, always the first to crack a grin in even the worst situations, gave a terse nod. "Roger that, Captain. We'll clear the path." As the shuttle approached the docking bay, a sudden jolt shook the vessel, a blast of energy hitting them from an unknown source. The cloaking device flickered, but they were still hidden. For now. "They know we're here," West said, her eyes flicking to the redouts. "We've been compromised." "Pull us in," Carter barked. "Get to that docking bay now, Ford." The shuttle's engines screamed as they powered forward, the darkness of the station swallowing them whole. The docking clamps engaged, pulling the shuttle into the bay with a heavy thud. "Move," Carter ordered, unstrapping himself and leaping toward the rear hatch. The team followed suit, weapons in hand, ready for the fight that was now inevitable. The moment the doors opened, the cold metal floors of the station greeted them, their boots echoing in the silence. The air was thick with a faint, acidic smell, some combination of chemicals and organic matter that made every breath feel heavier. The dim lights above flickered, casting long shadows across the hallway leading into the station's heart. "All right, stick to the plan," Carter said, his voice low but firm. "Riley, secure the outer perimeters. West and I are going straight for the communications array. We don't have much time." Riley nodded, signaling his team. "Let's go, boys." The group split, moving swiftly and silently through the narrow hallways, their rifles raised. Carter and West moved toward the heart of the station, the eerie hum of the Zoreth's psychic network reverberating through the walls, as if the station itself was alive. Carter's instincts told him that they were getting close. They encountered their first patrol just as they rounded a corner. 3 Zoreth soldiers, hulking figures with glowing, insect-like eyes. They had no mouths, no facial features, just a hive-mind presence that pulsed from them, like a single consciousness inhabiting multiple bodies. West was the first to react, her hand moving with surgical precision as she activated a low-frequency EMP grenade. The explosion was brief but powerful, scrambling their systems and temporarily disorienting the Zorath warriors. Carter didn't hesitate. In one fluid motion, he pulled his sidearm and fired. 3 shots, each one landing precisely in the creature's chest. The Zorath fell, their bodies twitching as their hive mind connection was severed. "Move," Carter ordered, his voice steady. "We don't have much time." They continued deeper into the station, each step bringing them closer to their target. As they neared the communications array, a sudden shrill alarm blared, and the lights flickered, turning red. "They know we're here," West said, urgency creeping into her voice. "We're about to be overwhelmed. Let's finish this." The massive door to the communications room loomed ahead, heavily reinforced. Carter reached for the detonator on his belt and triggered the charge. The explosion was deafening, sending a shockwave through the station. The door crumpled under the blast, revealing the array in the center of the room, a massive, glowing nexus of psychic energy. Before they could approach, a swarm of Zorath soldiers poured into the room, their minds connected and unified in a single violent surge. Carter fired into the group, forcing them back, but there were too many. "West," he shouted, stepping forward, firing his weapon until it was empty. "Get to the array, now." Dr. West hesitated for only a moment before rushing forward, her fingers flying over the console. Carter covered her, every shot counting, every moment stretching into eternity. "We're running out of time," she said, eyes scanning the readouts. "I'm going to shut down their comms. Just hold them off." And with that, the fight for humanity's future began in earnest. The Zorath were relentless. Captain Jack Carter had seen enough war to know that the first strike was rarely the decisive one. But even he had underestimated just how quickly the Zorath could regroup and retaliate. Within minutes of Dr. Olivia West's successful sabotage of their communications array, the station had erupted into chaos. The Zorath soldiers, disoriented by the loss of their hive mind coordination, turned on each other for a moment, long enough for the humans to slip away. But it was only a moment. The hive's psychic network was restored, and the Zorath rallied like an angry swarm of insects, reasserting control over their forces with terrifying speed. The silence was over. The war had begun in earnest. As Carter and West made their way back to the shuttle bay, the station's walls seemed to close in around them. Zorath patrols appeared at every corner, the soldiers' glowing eyes scanning the dark corridors with unnerving precision. But their numbers were thinning, their coordination slipping. West had done her job well, and now the Resolute was on its way to pick them up. "We're almost there," Carter muttered, his voice tight. "Just hold it together, Doc." West, her breath shallow and face drawn from the effort, nodded without speaking. She had never expected an easy fight, but even she had underestimated the scale of the Zorath retaliation. They rounded a corner and came face to face with a squad of Zorath soldiers. 3 of them, their thick armored exoskeletons almost indestructible, their eyes glowing faintly under the flickering lights. The Zorath stopped dead, sensing their presence, the hive mind consciousness flickering through them like a beacon. Carter didn't hesitate. He grabbed West's arm, pulling her into a side alcove just as the Zorath started moving toward them, their glowing eyes fixed on the shadows. There was no time for finesse. He needed to act fast. "West, the EMP," he barked, voice low but urgent. West fumbled with her gear, her fingers trembling as she pulled out a small device. "On it, but it won't hold them for long." "Long enough," Carter said, pulling his sidearm. The EMP grenade exploded in a brilliant flash of blue light, and for a moment, the Zorath soldiers froze, their neural links scrambled. Carter didn't wait for them to recover. He fired 2 quick shots into the nearest Zorath's chest, his training taking over as his hands moved on instinct. The other Zorath charged, but West was already moving, tossing a second grenade into their midst. The explosion sent them crashing to the ground. Twitching, their bodies spasming from the disruption of their hive mind connection. Carter took a deep breath, forcing his heart rate to slow. "We need to move now." West nodded, scrambling to her feet. They didn't have the luxury of sticking around. With the Zoreth now alerted to their presence, reinforcements would be flooding the station any moment. The Resolute was still on standby, but time was running out. As they reached the shuttle bay, the station trembled under the weight of a massive explosion. The blast reverberated through the walls, and Carter knew that it wasn't just the Resolute. It was the Zoreth forces preparing for a counteroffensive. The battle was far from over. "We've got incoming," Carter muttered. "Get to the shuttle. West. Now." The shuttle bay doors were a mere few hundred yards away, but as they sprinted down the corridor, the sound of Zoreth footsteps grew louder. The first Zoreth soldiers appeared, rushing toward them with a disturbing speed. They were close, too close. "West," Carter shouted, reaching into his belt and pulling out a small grenade. "Cover me." West didn't hesitate. She unslung her rifle and opened fire, picking off the approaching Zoreth one by one. Carter pulled the pin on the grenade, tossing it just behind the advancing line of soldiers. The explosion rocked the hallway, sending shards of metal and Zoreth bodies flying in all directions. But they didn't have time to celebrate. More Zoreth were coming. Hundreds, it seemed. "Move, now," Carter shouted, barely a second to spare. They sprinted the final stretch, leaping into the shuttle just as the doors slammed shut behind them. The engines roared to life, and within moments, the shuttle blasted off, leaving the station far behind. Carter, breathing heavily, glanced at the team. They were all alive, but barely. As they broke through the atmosphere and into the cold vacuum of space, the reality of their mission's success began to settle in. They had done it. They had struck the first blow. But victory, Jack knew, had come at a price. The Zoreth were not so easily defeated. The war had just begun, and the cost would only escalate from here. "Get us back to the Resolute," Carter ordered the pilot, his voice tired but resolute. "We've got a long road ahead." West, looking exhausted but determined, nodded from across the shuttle. "The worst is yet to come," she said quietly. Jack stared out at the stars as the shuttle's engines pushed them toward their next battle. The price of victory had been steep, and they had just begun to understand what it would take to win this war. But as long as humanity had the will to fight, they would not go down without a fight. The Resolute was in high orbit above the shattered remnants of the Zoreth station, its guns still warm from the brief skirmish. Captain Jack Carter stood on the bridge, watching the data streams flicker across the tactical screen. His mind was still racing, the adrenaline of the mission fading, leaving behind the cold reality of what they'd just done. "We did it," Carter said quietly, but the words felt hollow. They had taken out the communications array and crippled the Zoreth's ability to coordinate their forces in the system, but it hadn't come without a cost. Sergeant Marcus Riley was at his side, his face streaked with grime, his eyes tired but filled with the fire of someone who'd seen battle and survived. "We've hurt them, but they'll be coming for us now. You don't cripple a hive mind without getting their attention." Carter nodded grimly, his eyes fixed on the reports flooding in. The Resolute had taken a few hits during the retreat, and their stealth systems were damaged, meaning they wouldn't get far undetected. Their time was running out. Dr. Olivia West approached from the rear, rubbing her temples as if the weight of the mission had settled deep into her bones. "Carter, we've done what we could here, but we need to capitalize on this strike. The Zoreth won't stay disoriented for long. They're starting to regroup." "We've got a few hours, maybe less," Carter said, tapping the console in front of him. "But you're right. This was only a small victory in a war we're not prepared for." Ford's voice came through the comms, breaking the tension. "Captain, you're going to want to see this." Carter turned toward the screen as the tactical map expanded. Several Zoreth warships had just emerged from the far side of the system, no longer masked by the debris of their station. They were making a beeline for the Resolute, a fleet that seemed to grow by the minute. "They're not wasting any time," Riley muttered. "They're angry," Carter said, his jaw tightening. We're a thorn in their side now. They'll do everything to crush us before we can do any more damage. The Zoreth had already launched a wave of drones, small but deadly fighter ships designed to swarm and overwhelm. They had underestimated the human resolve during the first strike, but that wouldn't happen again. The Zoreth were ruthless, and Carter knew they would stop at nothing to make an example out of them. "We can't outrun them with our shields down," Ford warned, her fingers flying over the controls. "We need to make a stand. Now." Carter's eyes flicked over to West, who had her hands on the edge of a nearby console, her brow furrowed in concentration. "What's the plan, Doc?" "We're not leaving this system without doing more damage," West said, her voice low but steady. "If we hit their supply lines, their repair crews, and their support ships, we'll make them bleed. The longer we can keep them from recovering, the better our chances." Carter considered her words for a moment. It was a risk, a dangerous one. But there was no other choice. The Resolute could not stand alone against a full Zoreth fleet, and if they didn't strike again, they would be hunted down like the rest of humanity's colonies. "All right," Carter said finally, his voice resolute. "Ford, plot a course toward their supply depot on the 5th moon. We'll hit them hard, disable their refueling stations and repair yards, and make them think twice about chasing us." Ford nodded. "Understood. It's a risky move, but it's our best shot." As the crew scrambled to prepare for the mission, Riley turned to Carter. "What if the Resolute can't make it? What if we're overwhelmed?" Carter met his gaze, his eyes cold with determination. "We'll fight until we can't fight anymore. If we're going down, we're going down swinging." The crew worked quickly, making final preparations for the assault on the Zoreth supply depot. West stayed by Carter's side, the two of them poring over the schematics of the supply moon. It was lightly defended, a prime target for a team of humans who knew how to strike hard and fast. "Captain," West said, glancing over her shoulder as the countdown to departure began, "this will only buy us time. After that, it's all on us. We need to be ready for whatever comes next." Carter nodded, clenching his fist around the edge of the console. He had no illusions. The Zoreth were not a species to be deterred by a single blow, but humanity had just proved one thing. Their resolve was unbreakable, and for the first time in his life, Carter felt a spark of something greater than fear. It was hope. "Let's move," Carter said, his voice a steady rock. "We have a war to win." The Resolute jumped into FTL space, heading toward the Zoreth moon. Their fleet was coming, but so was humanity's defiance, and as long as Carter still drew breath, he would make sure they paid dearly for every inch they tried to take. In the heart of the galaxy, humanity had drawn the line, and now they were going to make the Zoreth regret ever crossing it. The Resolute entered the proximity of the Zoreth moon with a sharp jolt, the sudden deceleration pushing everyone into their seats. Jack Carter's gaze flicked over the battle readiness reports on the command screen, his jaw tight with concentration. The assault on the Zoreth supply depot was a calculated risk, a desperate attempt to slow down an enemy that had shown no mercy. They were about to face a challenge unlike any they had before. "We're in range," Lieutenant Emily Ford's voice broke the silence. "We've got minimal Zoreth resistance in the immediate vicinity, but it won't stay that way for long." Carter gave a quick nod, his face grim. "We've got 10 minutes. We need to take out their refueling and maintenance stations before reinforcements arrive. Ford, you know the drill. Lead the charge, keep us moving." Ford's fingers moved rapidly over her console, and a moment later, the Resolute was plunging toward the moon's surface. The ship shuddered from the stress of high-speed travel, but it held steady, the precision of the crew never wavering. The Zoreth supply base came into view, a sprawling complex built into the moon's jagged surface. Several large refueling platforms hovered in orbit, while repair stations clung to the craggy ground like wounds on the moon's face. The area appeared lightly defended, more of a logistical hub than a full-fledged military installation. But Carter knew better. This was a trap. The Zoreth wouldn't leave their most vital resources undefended. And sure enough, as soon as they dropped out of FTL, the first wave of Zoreth drones shot out from hidden hangars and docked stations, their angular ships cutting through the vacuum like predatory birds of prey. "Deploying fighters now," Ford called, her voice steady but tense. "We've got company." Carter's eyes snapped to the tactical display as the Resolute's fighter wing launched, a dozen human starfighters streaking toward the approaching swarm. The Zoreth drones were fast, but they lacked the raw maneuverability and combat instinct that humanity's pilots had honed over decades of warfare. "Focus fire on their missile turrets first," Carter ordered, leaning forward in his seat, his gaze sharp. "Take down their heavy hitters, and then clear a path for the ground assault." The Resolute fired first, its guns blazing with precision. The Zoreth drones scattered, dodging and weaving as they returned fire, but the human starfighters were too nimble. The Resolute's turrets shredded enemy ships one by one, their explosions lighting up the void. "Incoming bombardment from the surface," Riley's voice crackled over the comms. "We've got a heavy barrage coming from their ground defenses." Carter swore under his breath. "Take us in low, Ford. We need to be on the ground before those bombardment guns can get a lock on us." The Resolute dropped into a high-speed descent, skimming the jagged landscape of the moon. Explosions from surface-based cannons rocked the ship's hull as the enemy targeted them with relentless precision. The shields flared up in response, absorbing the blasts, but the stress was taking a toll. They couldn't take many more hits like that. "Brace for impact," Ford shouted as the Resolute hurtled toward the surface. The ship's landing gear deployed with a metallic hiss, and with a sudden thud, they slammed onto the moon's surface, shaking, but intact. "Let's move," Carter barked as the landing bay doors flew open. The assault team, armed and ready, poured out of the ship. Riley's voice came through his comms almost immediately. "Ground team in position. The repair station's just ahead, but we've got heavy Zoreth infantry in the area. We'll need support from the air." Carter nodded, his eyes flicking to the tactical display. The fighters had engaged the remaining drones, but their job wasn't over yet. "Ford, take command of the fighters. Riley, we need to push through to those refueling stations. West, you're with me." "Understood," West replied, her face tense but resolute. "Let's make it count." Carter led the charge, Riley and his team close behind. The surface of the moon was barren, covered in sharp rocks and dust, with the remains of Zoreth machinery scattered about. It wasn't long before they encountered the first wave of ground troops, a squad of Zoreth warriors emerging from hidden bunkers. Their insectoid forms clicked and whirred, but their eyes were now clouded with rage, driven by the hive mind's fury. The first shots rang out, and the air was filled with a terrible, screeching wail as Zoreth soldiers fell. But they kept coming. Carter dropped to one knee, returning fire with precision. His rifle barked with deadly accuracy, taking out the closest Zoreth with a well-placed shot to the head. Beside him, West moved with surgical precision, her hands never shaking as she lined up each shot. Despite the danger, Carter couldn't help but be impressed by her calm under pressure. But as the firefight intensified, Carter could hear the rumble of something larger approaching. The ground trembled beneath their feet, and when he glanced up, his blood ran cold. A massive Zoreth war machine, its exoskeleton bristling with heavy cannons, emerged from the dust clouds. It was a hulking monstrosity, a walking fortress that could crush everything in its path. "This is bad," Riley muttered, his voice tight. "That thing's got enough firepower to wipe out our whole team in seconds." Carter's eyes never left the advancing machine. He could feel the weight of the decision pressing down on him. "Everyone fall back," he shouted, pulling the trigger once more. "We need to disable that thing. Now." As the Zoreth behemoth loomed closer, Carter knew this would be their toughest fight yet. They had one shot. If they didn't take it, the Resolute wouldn't be the only thing they'd lose. The war was far from over, and now humanity had to pay the ultimate price to win. The ground shook with the heavy footfalls of the Zoreth war machine, as it lumbered toward Captain Jack Carter and his team. The enormous mechanical behemoth loomed on the horizon, its armored legs grinding against the cracked surface of the moon. Its hull was a patchwork of advanced organic tech, part metal, part something far more alien. The beast's cannons rotated with a low, menacing hum, its glowing eyes scanning the battlefield for any trace of life. "We've got one shot at this," Carter muttered under his breath, his eyes locked on the approaching monstrosity. "Fall back to cover. Now." The team scrambled, ducking behind the jagged rocks that littered the moon's desolate surface. Carter's heart pounded in his chest as the massive war machine came closer. If they didn't disable its weapon systems before it reached them, they wouldn't survive. The Zhorith didn't need to outnumber you. They just needed to crush you with overwhelming force. "Riley, you have eyes on it?" Carter asked over the comms, his voice steady despite the tension. "Yeah," Riley's voice came through. "But this thing's a fortress. Its weapons are all protected by layers of armor, and those turrets are nearly as big as our fighters. We can't punch through that unless we hit it at the core. We got to get close enough to do that," Carter said, his mind racing. "West, what's the status on that EMP?" "I've got a couple of charges left." Dr. Olivia West's voice came through, tense but calm. "But they're short range. I can't get within range of the power core unless we create a distraction." Carter's gaze snapped to the rest of the team. "All right, here's the plan. Riley, you and I will draw its fire. West, I need you to get in close and hit the power grid with the EMP. Ford, keep the skies clear. You've got air support to hold off the Zhorith reinforcements." The plan was insane, but Carter knew they had no other choice. He could see the gleam of the Zhorith war machine's weapons now, the heavy turrets rotating into position. If they didn't act fast, they'd be wiped out before they could even make a dent. "Let's go," Carter shouted, sprinting toward the exposed area where the Zhorith behemoth's firepower was focused. Riley followed close behind, both of them darting between rocks, keeping low to the ground. The war machine's massive cannons fired without warning, sending a series of blasts toward them. Carter dove behind a rock just as a blast streaked by, vaporizing the dust where he'd been standing only a moment before. "Not good," Riley yelled, his voice strained. "We need more time. West, are you in position?" "I'm moving in now." West's voice came through, breathless. Carter could hear the urgency in her words. She was close. So close. The Zhorith war machine responded with a roar of energy, its heavy cannon swiveling to target the humans with deadly intent. Carter's heart raced as he and Riley fired back with everything they had, their weapons mostly ineffective against the war machine's reinforced exterior. But the Zhorith didn't know the full extent of the humans' resolve. They hadn't yet learned that humanity, when backed into a corner, fought harder than any species in the galaxy. "West, you've got this," Carter shouted into the comms, his voice filled with fierce determination. "I'm at the rear power core. Almost there," she replied, her voice growing more strained with each passing second. The sounds of Zhorith soldiers marching closer echoed in her words. "If I can just get the EMP on target." The war machine's main turret fired again, sending a burst of energy toward Carter and Riley's position. The blast hit the rock outcropping with such force that it cracked the surface and sent debris flying in every direction. Carter ducked low, barely avoiding the shrapnel that flew past him. "Carter," Riley shouted, "we need to move now." But Carter could see it, the opening they needed. The war machine had slowed down, its turret reorienting. It was focusing too much on their position, its attention diverted for a split second. That was all the time West needed. "West," Carter called out, his pulse quickening. "Now." There was a brief pause, followed by the sharp crack of an explosion in the distance. The sound of the EMP charge detonating was unmistakable. The war machine shuddered as the energy pulse radiated outward, scrambling its systems. For a brief, heart-stopping moment, it looked as though the Zhorith machine might recover. Its turrets whirred, trying to realign. But then, the power core exploded, sending a shockwave across the battlefield. The Zorth machine's legs buckled, its glowing eyes flickering out as its systems fried. Carter and Riley rushed forward, weapons raised, as the behemoth crumpled to the ground with a deafening crash. It was a victory, but one that came at a price. "West, report," Carter shouted into the comms. "I'm alive." Barely, West's voice came back, ragged and worn. "I hit the core just in time. It's down, but I'm trapped inside the wreckage." The Zorth war machine lay in ruins, its hulking form twisted and broken, the last sparks of its power flickering out like dying embers. But even as its massive frame crumbled into the moon's rocky surface, Captain Jack Carter knew that this victory had come at a steep price. "We've got to move fast," Carter said, his voice low but firm, the weight of the situation pressing down on him. His eyes flicked across the battlefield to the wreckage of the war machine, where Dr. Olivia West was still trapped inside. The EMP had done its job, disabling the behemoth, but it had also left her pinned beneath its twisted remnants. "Riley, take point. Ford, cover us from above. We'll need a quick evac once we get to West." The urgency in Carter's voice didn't leave room for hesitation. The Zorth weren't done yet. The moment the war machine had fallen, they knew the humans would make their move. Zorth reinforcements were already converging on the area, and soon the Resolute wouldn't be able to shield them. "Understood, Captain," Riley responded, his voice tight with determination. He scanned the perimeter, his weapon raised, watching for any movement. "Let's move." The team sprinted toward the wreckage, moving with practiced precision. The terrain was rough, jagged rock and dust scattered everywhere from the battle, but the scent of burned metal and ozone still hung heavy in the air. Carter kept his eyes on the wreckage as they approached, knowing full well that the Zorth would send everything they had to retake the moon. When they reached the wreck, Carter found West half buried beneath a chunk of debris, her face streaked with dirt and blood. She was conscious, but clearly in pain, her arm pinned under a heavy beam. Her eyes met Carter's, and she gave him a weak but determined smile. "I'm all right," she rasped, though her voice was strained. "Get me out of here." "We're on it," Carter said, kneeling down beside her. Riley was already at her side, lifting the debris with a grunt of effort. Carter worked quickly, using his knife to cut away the tangled wires and cables that had ensnared her. As the last of the wreckage was moved, West sat up with a groan, her face pale but resolute. "We've got to get to the shuttle. Now." "Ford's prepping for evac," Riley confirmed, scanning the horizon for any sign of enemy movement. "But we're gonna have company. Zorth troops are closing in fast." "We don't have much time," Carter said, helping West to her feet. She winced but didn't protest, and that silent determination only made Carter more determined to get them out of there. The team quickly fell into formation, Carter leading the charge with Riley on his flank, covering their six. The air felt heavy with the promise of incoming fire, and Carter knew they were being hunted. They'd just dealt a blow to the Zorth, but the Zorth didn't know how to lose. They would retaliate, fiercely. As they neared the shuttle, Ford's voice crackled through the comms. "We've got incoming. A full squad of Zorth soldiers. Airborne units. They'll be on top of you in minutes. Just keep the engines hot," Carter said, his heart pounding. "We need a clear path." Suddenly, the sky above them lit up with fire as Zorth drones streaked in from above. The fighters had arrived. "Cover fire," Riley shouted, laying down suppressive fire as Carter and West dove into the shuttle. The ramp began to close even as the first shots rang out, forcing the team to scramble for cover. A Zorth drone exploded into a fiery burst just as it came within range, its debris scattering in all directions. "Go, go, go," Ford yelled from the cockpit, the engines already roaring to life. As the shuttle lifted off, Carter glanced out the rear viewport. The Zorth forces were already scrambling to regroup. The giant war machine was down, but reinforcements were pouring in from the surface. The battle wasn't over. They had bought themselves some time, but Carter knew the Zorth would keep coming. "We need to rendezvous with the Resolute and prepare for another strike," Carter said, turning to the crew. This was just the first wave. The war's only getting started. West, though clearly exhausted, managed a tired smile. "I don't think the Zorth are going to know what hit them." Carter nodded, his gaze hardening. "We've shown them they can't just push humanity around. Now we need to make sure they understand. We're the ones who decide when this war ends." The shuttle blasted away from the moon's surface, the Resolute already in motion in the distance. The stars above seemed distant and cold, but Carter felt something burning in him that kept the fear at bay. Hope, perhaps, or maybe the raw, unshakable will to survive. One battle had been won, but many more lay ahead, and humanity would face them all with fire in its heart. The Zorth had made a mistake. They had underestimated the humans' ability to fight, to adapt, and to overcome. And the galaxy would soon know it. "Hang on, Doc," Carter said through gritted teeth, looking over at Riley. "Riley, we've got to move fast. We can't leave her behind." The team quickly moved toward the fallen war machine, hearts pounding with the realization that they had won this round. But the Zorth were not finished. They had just begun to feel the pain of humanity's resolve. And Carter knew this war was far from over.